Last week we talked the first part of chapter 1 about Christ being revealed, and this is the theme of Romans. The book of Romans is revealing Christ. And so in Romans chapter number 1, last week we ended in verse 7. We're going to start in verse 8. Romans chapter 1, verse 8. Here the Apostle Paul says this: "First I thank my God through Jesus Christ, for you all, that your faith is spoken of throughout the whole world. For God is my witness, whom I serve with my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing I make mention of you always in my prayers, making request, if by any means now at length I might have a prosperous journey by the will of God to come unto you. For I long to see you, that I may impart unto you some spiritual gift, to the end ye may be established. That is, that I may be comforted together with you by the mutual faith, both of you and me. Now I would not have you ignorant, brethren, that oftentimes I purposed to come unto you, but was led hitherto, that I might have some fruit among you also, even as among other Gentiles. I am debtor both of the Greeks and of the barbarians, both to the wise and to the unwise. So as much as in me is, I am ready to preach the gospel to you that are at Rome also. For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation, to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith." Father, as we gather this morning, and as we have come to the preaching portion of the service, Father, I ask that you would empty me of my sin, empty me of myself, and fill me with thine Holy Ghost, that I may preach, thus saith the word of the Lord. Father, I ask that you would guide and direct for the rest of this service. Father, if there be anything that is binding for our time, whether it's job, the meal at home, or whatever it may be, I ask that we would set it aside and we would focus, Father, on your word, the preaching of thy word. And we'll be sure to give you honor and glory, for it is in Christ's name we pray. Amen. Thank you. You may be seated. We'll ask God to bless the reading of his word. Today I would like to speak to you on the subject of Paul's ready are you? Paul's ready are you? Here we have the Apostle Paul as he's writing this letter to the book of Romans. He says here at the beginning, he says, "First I thank God through Jesus Christ for you all, that your faith is spoken of throughout the whole world." Number one, Paul is ready to come to Rome. Paul's ready to come to Rome. And he says in verse 8 that he thanks God for them all, and that their faith is spoken of throughout the whole world. Paul has heard of their faith in Rome. You know, when you hear of churches in America, there are certain churches that you hear of because of the ministry that they have, the things that they are doing for Christ. There are church, back in the day, it was First Baptist Church in Hammond, Indiana. Jack Hyles, right? And now some of the most prominent ones are Lancaster Baptist Church in Lancaster, California. And there are others all along this countryside that you hear about because of the ministry and the influence that this church has, and that God has blessed that church. And when you're on vacation, sometimes you're like, we're going to be in that area. Let's go to that church. And there's an excitement about being able to visit a church because that you've heard of and that God is doing a great work in. It's like the Lancaster Baptist Church has a spiritual leadership conference. this month. If it's not already going on, or if it's about to. It's going on, and what it does is Lancaster Baptist Church, they invite all pastors, missionaries, whoever is in the ministry, out to Lancaster Baptist Church. It's a pretty penny to go, but they invite them out. What they do is they teach them things how they do things at Lancaster Baptist Church, and help give the pastors, missionaries, church planners resources to help them in the ministry. And that when you go, there's an excitement about going to Lancaster Baptist Church, because not only of West Coast Baptist College, the college that is there, but just the thing just what's going on. And same as First Baptist Church in Hammond, Indiana. Back in the day, they had pastor school. And preachers would travel from all over the country to go to Brother Howe's pastor school, and there was excitement. Well, here, Paul, he's ready to come to Rome because he's heard of their faith. Now, let me tell you something. It is exciting to go to a church that is known, especially in the area, from their faith. Because I remember when we would go back a few years ago when we took Samantha to college days at Heartland Baptist Bible College, I was excited to go back and to go back to Southwest Baptist Church. The church there where I got at Heartland, where I got my pastoral degree, because I know what God is doing, and it was exciting for me to go back there. And Paul here, he's ready to come to Rome. Why? Because he's heard of their faith. Paul's anticipating coming to Rome and to see them. And I don't know about you, but it should be exciting to come to the Groffroad Baptist Church. There should be an excitement when you wake up, or especially Saturday night, getting ready. You know what? We're going to get up early. This time we're going to get up. We're going to get ready. And we're going to come to church. There ought to be, because if you believe Groffroad Baptist Church to be the church that you are to be at, your local church, you ought to be excited about attending that church. If you're not excited in coming to the Groffroad Baptist Church, you need to get along with God and find out why. But Paul was excited to come to Rome because he heard of their faith. It's exciting to go to a church that has stuff going on, right? Their faith. Not only about that, if you see, for God is my witness, whom I serve with my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing I make mention of you always in my prayers, making request, if by any means now at length I might have a prosperous journey by the will of God to come unto you. For I long to see you, and he says, that I might impart unto you some spiritual gift, to the end that you may be established. That is, that I may be comforted together with you by the mutual faith both in you and me. He says here in verse 11, for I long to see you that I may impart unto you some spiritual gift. Paul says, I want to impart unto you a spiritual gift. Let me explain to you what this spiritual gift is. He's ready to preach to the Romans. That's what he says. That's what he's gearing up to. He says, I'm ready to impart some spiritual gift. Brother Roy, a spirit-filled, Christ-honoring message is a gift. That is a spiritual gift. When you come to the Groffroad Baptist Church, it is my desire to impart unto you a spiritual gift, a message from the Word of God. And this is what Paul's saying. I'm ready to come to you because I'm ready to preach unto you and to give you a spiritual gift. Some people don't see the message as a spiritual gift. It's because they're carnally minded. All they're worried, they come and folks come and they're more worried about getting back home or going out to eat on Sunday. They come just so that they can be seen, so they won't get a phone call by someone or ask, where they've been. But no, one, it ought to be exciting to come to the Groffroad Baptist Church because it is the church that it is your local church. Not only that, to receive a spiritual gift. And this is what Paul's saying. I want to come to you because I want to preach unto you. Not just anything, but he wants to preach the gospel to them. And so he not only is Paul excited to go to Rome because he's heard their faith, but he wants to give a spiritual gift. All week is leading Monday through Saturday is leading to Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. All throughout the week we study in order to give the people a spiritual gift, a Christ-honoring, Spirit-filled message. Not only is Paul ready to come to Rome, Paul is ready to preach the gospel to Rome. Verse 13, he says, "Now I would not have you be ignorant, I would not have you ignorant, brethren, that oftentimes I purposed to come unto you, but was led hitherto, that I might have some fruit among you also, even as among other Gentiles. I am debtor both to the Greeks and to the barbarians, both to the wise and to the unwise. So as much as in me is, I am ready to preach the gospel unto you that are at Rome also." Paul was ready to preach the gospel. See, Paul here considers in verse 14, he says, "I am debtor." Why does he say I'm a debtor? Was Paul like us, going charging things on his Grecian credit card? No. Running up a tab at Rome, and now he has to, he says, "I'm a debtor because now, no." He says, "I'm a debtor." Why is he a debtor, both to the Greeks and to the barbarians? Well, see, there was a transaction that was made with him and Christ, between him and Christ. Christ bought him with his blood, right? Just as he has bought us. And he's a debtor to Christ, but he's a debtor to both the Greeks and the barbarians. What does he owe the Greeks and the barbarians? The gospel. That's what he owes them, is the gospel. Here, when he says the Greeks and the barbarians, he's saying to the Greeks is those who are civilized and those who are intellectual, because that's what the Greeks were famous for, right? And he also talks about the barbarians. The barbarians are those who are not educated or uncivilized. Those who are without the city and who are not in the elite at Rome. And he goes, and what he's saying, he goes, "Listen, I'm a debtor both to the rich and to the poor." See, Paul didn't just choose a certain neighborhood that he went to go and talk to those folks. He went everywhere. He goes, "I am a debtor both to those who are educated, to the elite, and also those who are not." He goes, "I'm ready to preach Christ both to the rich and to the poor." He is a debtor to all of mankind, unto every soul, until every soul has heard the gospel. He was a debtor. So what does he say in verse 14? "I am a debtor both to the Greeks and to the barbarians, both to the wise and to the unwise." He goes, "So as much as in me is, I am ready to preach the gospel." Paul is ready to pay Rome. That's what's going on here. He is ready to pay his debt at Rome. He is ready to preach the gospel to those who are at Rome. And this just in, every single one of us ought to be ready to pay everyone in Baytown. I'm not talking about monetary. I'm not talking about us going and giving Baytonians money. No, I'm saying every one of us, every believer, ought to be ready to pay his debt with the gospel to all of Baytown. Paul here, that's what he's saying. He's ready to pay Rome. we ought to be ready to pay Baytel. As much as, look at verse 15 goes, so as much as in me is, I am ready to preach the gospel to you that are Rome also. See, there's a desire inside of you. There ought to be a desire in each one of us. NBA finals are over. The football hasn't even started yet. Listen, there's a desire. You know, folks have a desire for sports that is, sometimes it amazes me. Because that's all they talk about. They talk about it at work, they talk about it at home, they talk about it hanging out with their friends. That's it. They eat, breathe, sleep, sports. When I was a kid, I had a shirt that said eat, breathe, sleep, football, or eat, breathe, sleep, baseball, whatever it was. Folks, your children should see your desire is to be the desire of the Lord, to do the Lord's will. Because you know, your desire becomes their desire. Why did I grow up a Dallas Cowboy fan? Because my dad was a Dallas Cowboy fan. Why did I grow up liking the Texas Rangers? Because my dad liked the Texas Rangers. Your children are going to follow in your footsteps. And their desires will be what you desire. This is why the Bible says, train up your children in the way they should go. When they are old, they will not depart from it. See, Paul had his desire was the gospel. His desire was to see his countrymen Israel turn away from their sins and turn towards Christ. Not only that, but to the Gentiles, because he says that he wanted to come and that he wanted to have fruit from Rome. Not only in other Gentiles, but he wanted fruit from Rome. What does that mean? He wanted to see Romans saved. He goes, as much as in me that is, I am ready to preach the gospel to you that are Rome. As much that is in you and I, we ought to be ready to preach the gospel to those that are in Baytown. There should be a desire right here that cannot be quenched until you have preached the gospel to someone. Ladies, that goes for you too. When you go to work, you are to be a witness just as the men are. You don't there's no scapegoat for you. I can't do that because I'm not a man. No, you can win folks just as well as anyone else can. Paul says, I am ready to preach the gospel that you are at Rome. Not only was he ready to preach the gospel, what does he say? Verse 16, for I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. Why he says, I'm not ashamed. You know, too many times when somebody starts talking about religion, we quieten up. We don't say anything. Well, I just don't want to offend someone. Or, I just don't know enough about the subject that they're talking about. Then one of the greatest lies society and our other generations has said is this. Don't talk. Two things not to talk about, religion and politics. That is a lie. Why? Because it's so offensive. Well, the cross is offensive to those who don't know Christ. But to me, it's the power unto salvation. Paul says, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. And I will tell you, Paul was not ashamed. Because everywhere he went, his main purpose was to share Christ with others. Whether we are at work, whether we are at home, we ought to be sharing Christ. When I was, I think I was 20 or 21 when I came back to the church, I went wayward, like most teenagers do, unfortunately. And I came back to the church, and my cousin was a big influence on me because he was a drug addict. He was something else. He came back to the church, and he got off the drugs, and he was serving there at the church. And so he invited me back, and I got back into it, and I started getting involved with our singles group. Really involved. I was going to classes to learn how to share my faith. I was going every time the church had a service, whether it was a missions conference, whether we had an evangelist. I was there because I was hungry for the Word of God. And I would oftentimes go and stay with my cousin certain nights of the week. We would hang out. We were real close, and we were there one time. It was late at night, and he goes, I wish sometimes when we gather together, we talk about our Sunday school class. I wish we just talk about other things other than God. Because when we gathered, whether it was at a pizza place or whether we went on out to eat, our Sunday school class, we were talking about God and what God was doing in our life. Because He was important to us. And he made that statement, and I did say anything to him. I said, well, what else is there to talk about? Really, what is there else to talk about? Yeah, we can talk about the Houston Rockets and how James Harden is only meant for the regular season. Talk about how bad the Houston Texans are. And how bad Dallas Cowboys are. We can talk about that, but really, those things are trivial. They're minor. He goes, I am not ashamed of the gospel. And I'll tell you this, neither am I. The entire building of Walmart on 146 knows that I'm a Christian. They know where I stand. Because I am not ashamed of the gospel. And I will tell you this. I am not a busybody at Walmart either. I don't make it my business to go around and correct them. That they're sinful, that they ought not to be doing those things. But they know where I stand, because I am not ashamed of the gospel. And I will tell them, hey, if they use foul language, I'll tell them, hey, you ought not to use that one. This is a professional building place that we ought to be able to work as professionals and not use that kind. Because I'm not ashamed of Christ. The main place that anybody would be ashamed was what? The temple? Those Jews who got converted, they'd go to the temple. No, Paul went straight there and preached Christ to the temple. For those that are Jews. But there's a reason why Paul was not ashamed of the gospel. And it's in the second half. He goes, why? Because it's what? Starts with the letter P. Power. He's not ashamed of the gospel. What he says. For I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation. To everyone. Right? To everyone that believeth, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. He says, I'm not ashamed because there's power in the gospel. That word power is dunamos in the Greek. What does that mean? Dynamite. You know what they used to split these hills and mountains so that they could make a road? They used a dynamite to cause a way to where they could make a road. Right? When you use a stick of dynamite, when it explodes, it changes things. It destroys things. And this just is the power of Christ. The gospel has the power to change and disrupt the hold that Satan has on our country, on our society. The power that the gospel holds is able to change lives. I don't have that power to change a life, but the gospel does. He goes, it is the power of the reason I'm not ashamed is because the gospel has the power to change someone who is bound and on their way to hell to being free and on their way to heaven. He goes, I am not ashamed of the gospel because there's power in it. And this is what the Apostle Paul, he's telling these at Rome. Paul didn't hide the gospel because of who was around him, but instead he shared the gospel. What didn't Paul, wasn't he at a judgment seat? What did Agrippa say to him? Almost what? To a man who could have said, go. He stood there. He gave his testimony of who Christ is and what Christ did for him. And I almost persuaded him. Paul said, no, not just you, but everyone. It didn't matter who was there. Because Paul was not ashamed of the gospel because he knew the power of God was in the gospel. Not only was he not ashamed, he says, why? Because for therein is the righteousness of God revealed. From faith to faith, he goes, the righteousness of God is revealed through Christ. And he says, from faith to faith. What does that mean? That means from the faith that the Jews had to looking toward their Savior to the new faith of looking back to the Savior. In the Old Testament, they were looking to the Savior. Now, they're looking back at the cross of what the Savior did. From faith to faith. For the righteousness of God is revealed. It's revealed through Christ. What he did on the cross. See, Paul was not ashamed. He's ready. Paul is always ready. You know, there's a saying, I'm armed and I'm ready. Right? We say if somebody, all these with the gun debates, we're all saying, well, if they're going to take my guns, they're going to have to come and take it from my cold dead hands, right? Say, because I'm armed and ready. Well, Paul was armed and ready with the gospel for Rome. We should be armed and ready with the gospel for Bateman. Or Houston, wherever it is that you are, your neighborhood, you ought to be armed and ready. And be unashamed of the gospel of Christ, because it has the power to change your neighborhood. It has the power to change our town. It has the power to change our state, our country, all of it. Paul was ready. Are you? Have you experienced the power of change through the blood of Christ? Have you experienced that power? I'm not saying, well, you know, I go to church, I'm a member of such and such religion. That's not what I'm saying. Have you experienced the power through Christ? The gospel. Have you experienced the gospel? Have you humbled yourself and received the free gift of salvation with His offering through Christ? Have you done that? See, Christ is God is a gentleman. Jesus is a gentleman. He's not going to force His ways on you. He gives us a thing called free will. And you have the right to receive Him and receive the gospel, or you have the right, and you also have the right to reject Him and go to hell. You have a right to. And it is your choice. Every human being has that choice whether to receive Christ or to reject Him. Not only that, are you ready to serve in the ministry of the gospel? There's a lot lot of believers that are not ready to serve in the ministry because they still have an ashamed. They still feel ashamed that maybe they don't know the Bible as they ought to. We have a saying, trial by fire. Let the Holy Spirit guide you. Listen, I don't know this book, every part of this book. There's a lot of things in this Bible that I don't know, that I don't understand. But that is why I have the author that resides inside me. The Holy Spirit resides inside me, and I am relying on Him to reveal to me. Listen, you may not know everything, but that is why the Holy Spirit resides inside you. Because He is here to teach you, and as we studied in the book of John, to bring to your remembrance. Because I will tell you, there's times that I'm talking to someone, there's a verse that pops up. I haven't read that verse in a long time, but you can start there. One, have you experienced the life-changing power of the gospel? And two, if you have, are you ready to serve? Paul was ready to Rome. Are you ready to be? It's my job as your pastor to equip you to be ready. Are you ready? If not, let's get ready. Let's do what we can. What you can do. If you haven't experienced the gospel, in a moment, Ruth will begin to play the piano, and an invitation will be given. If you have yet to experience the gospel, if you don't know right now, if you were to die today, that heaven would be your home, please come forward and let us show you from the Bible how you can know for sure that heaven will be your home, and you can experience the power of the gospel. If you're not ready to serve, when the music begins to play, then I invite you to come to the altar and ask God to help you get ready. Change your heart. Change whatever He needs to so you can help the Buffalo Baptist Church serve Faith County with the gospel. Father, as we conclude this morning, Lord, there may be someone here that has never experienced the life-changing power of Jesus Christ. Never received the free gift of salvation that you offer through this Son. Father, if there's someone here that does not know that if they were to die today, that heaven would be their home, Father, I pray that you would give them the courage to step out and the music begins to play, to come forward and ask to receive the salvation that you have. We'll take the Bible that you gave us, Father, and show them your way out of this. Lord, if there's someone here, Lord, that has not yet gotten involved in the ministry of our church, Father, something may be holding them back, Father, I pray that they'll come to this altar, Lord, and they'll get that right and allow you to change their heart. Father, we ask that you be glorified in this invitation. For in Christ's name we pray. Amen. As the music begins to play,